Welcome into the Thunder basketball universe presented by COOP Ale Works. We're in Oklahoma City. We are coming to you from the Thunder business office, getting a little change of scenery today because we had to bring in a special guest today, Royce Young, who trekked all the way into the business office today with the snowy weather we've been having. Royce, thanks for making the effort today. We appreciate it.
Wouldn't miss it.
You know, it may be a snow day for others, but never for the TBU crew, especially when we got a guy like Royce.
Basketball never stops.
Yes, that's right.
As Michael Cage would say.
Basketball's never stop. That's right. Well, we have a lot to talk about, mainly the fact that the Thunder just came off of a road trip where they faced two of the top three teams in the Western Conference. They faced the Sacramento Kings on Friday, then turned around and faced the Denver Nuggets on Sunday. And those two games were incredible for multiple reasons. One, the Thunder took a lot of lessons from that Sacramento game. They left it all out there on the floor. They were down by 10 with less than a minute to go, and yet they had it at a one-possession ball game in the final moments, the final seconds, just relentless as always. And then the Thunder with a near wire-to-wire win over Denver. They were playing without Nikola Jokic in that game, but nevertheless, a really, really great performance from that team on the road in hostile territory and against one of the best and most potent offensive teams in the league.
You get a game winner and a game-winning stop by Lou Dort as well. And Paris, to your point, that game in Sacramento, I mean, this is like that whole trip. The heartbreak and the glory of being in the fight.
Yes.
And it's something that Mark Daigneault talks about all the time is like, this is the cost of doing business. This is the cost of competition.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that we've talked about it a lot with this group over the last couple of years, Nick, of what close games can do for you and the experiences that you draw from those sorts of things. And you really just kind of saw that in kind of a back-to-back scenario where, even against Denver, where the offense didn't really flow as well as it did earlier in the game. There were some struggles there, but to continue getting stops, get a little good luck, too, at the free throw line. Free throw defense was on point by the Thunder in that one.
But one of Royce's favorite topics 100%. Of all time.
Yeah. But, to go on the road and beat the Nuggets and come up with the plays when you need them, there's different ways to win in the NBA. And you're not always going to do it the exact same way. And I think that having that kind of it's almost a skill, like a way to win in a variety of ways. But even the game against the Kings, I'll say this: like that was a great game.
It was awesome.
It was highly competitive, back and forth throughout. And if you go back and watch that fourth quarter, truly it was like Thunder missed some shots, had some great opportunities to build a lead, to kind of sustain the lead. So, nothing to really even – that's just basketball. That's basketball in the NBA. Right. You're not going to win all of them all the time. And
60-win teams lose that game. You know, against the third best team in the West on the road. Like that's a loss that's going to happen. Yeah. And the fact that the Thunder was right in it from the opening tip through to the very end of the game, I think very encouraging signs.
And that's something that's that I think as we talk about this group over the last month or so that has been noticeably different is that, while they have it, I think, in their bag that they can make that comeback charge, we're not seeing that near as much. Now we're seeing the Thunder play from in front a lot more. And to me, that's just like a developmental checkpoint where you see this group that is like not having to try to kind of like re-energize itself out of halftime or whatever it is. But now the Thunder are sort of taking it to, and that's been a point of emphasis from the coaching staff is to make that adjustment. And I think we've seen that a lot more. The games have been like tighter and more competitive versus those big, kind of dramatic shifts on the scoreboard.
Well, just to add some context to this, the Thunder over the course of January is averaging around 32 points per first quarter. So they're getting out to really strong starts. They're the team that is hitting and landing the first punch most often in this month of January. And when I talked to Coach Daigneault about this, he was like, it's obviously been an emphasis this entire season. But what we're seeing is rather than guys kind of like wait things out and like see how teams are going to play them, they're just imposing their will and playing their style rather than kind of coming out casually and kind of absorbing things and then responding. They're kind of like setting the tone from the outset.
And that's what the best teams do. This Thunder team, again, second youngest in NBA history, is still developing its offensive identity. But you think about the Golden States and the Denvers and these teams that like they know exactly how they're going to play. And it's why they're usually one of the best first quarter teams in the NBA is like they are completely clear on who they are and what their identity is. The Thunder with 20-year-olds and 23-year-olds is still figuring that out. But that's more and more crystallized even than it was at the beginning of this season.
It's honestly, now that I'm like thinking this through, Nick, that's a great point because we've seen like this offensive identity start to kind of crystallize a little bit in the last kind of month and a half. Really, I mean, we've seen traces of it. You know, I think back even to that game in Dallas last year that Sam Presti talked about at the end of the season where it like felt like that was kind of like the the foundation of it. But, clearly this team wants to play with this rhythm,
Yeah.
right? Like less patterns, more rhythm, as Sam said. But, this drive and kick action where the ball is popping all over the place, that can be really hard, I think, to establish right from the jump, where you want to get everybody in a flow early. You want to establish rhythm. So it's like, trying to figure out who takes shots when and how you kind of like build that. It's hard to like establish rhythm right from the jump.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, I'm just kind of hypothesizing, but maybe that's one of those reasons that those slow starts were kind of part of it, is because they were trying to figure out how do you generate rhythm early in games.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see that more. The chemistry is building.
Mm-hmm.
This group knows how to play a little bit more with each other, and that it doesn't take a quarter and a half to start to feel that rhythm and the ball zipping around and the drive and kick action happening, but they kind of get it going right from the jump.
And it could be anybody that initiates that. And one guy who's really stepped up, and I want to talk about a couple of guys while we're on this road trip. The first guy that comes to mind is Josh Giddey, where he, especially in the Denver game, he really popped in that first quarter. I think he had 8 points in that first quarter. He was just getting downhill. He was imposing his will. He was just kind of putting his shoulder down, playing with some edge. But that started to start the blender offensively, like you're saying, and kind of getting things going and moving the shell of the defense.
And by the end of the game, one of the absolute best plays of the entire game involved Giddey, but it was actually Darius Baisley who was the playmaker in the final moment of the possession. This is in the fourth quarter. Ball goes through the middle of the floor, gets to Isaiah Joe in the corner. Joe drives baseline, kicks it back to the wing. Baisley then reattacks, gets into the middle of the floor and kicks it back to Isaiah Joe for a wide open corner three. That type of basketball isn't always like second nature to some of these young guys who started out their careers in OKC. That's something that's been developed and built over time. I think Darius is a perfect example of a guy who came in so raw. I mean, didn't play organized collegiate basketball or anything like that. And so to see him in a high pressure situation now at year 4 to be able to execute that way. And I think, Paris, to your point, it's in the water now, and there are catalysts to that, like Josh.
Yeah, and to your point about Bays is that wasn't his role early on either. He stepped onto a playoff team, and his role was kind of 3-and-D. He shot a lot of corner threes. That was kind of who he was supposed to be. Right, run the floor, play in transition, shoot corner threes. And so, you kind of have to evolve into different identities as you go along. But, to your point, Paris, about Josh, like one thing that really stood out to me and that I think that we've seen just kind of sort of develop over the last few months is like the cutting on the team.
Yeah.
And Josh is such a smart cutter. Yeah. J-Dub is such a good cutter. All these players, they're
like elite cutters.
Aaron Wiggins is a great cutter. And like that is, and to be able to time that up and have that kind of like unspoken chemistry with the passer at the same time. For a guy like Giddey specifically, like he's typically the guy delivering on the cut.
Right.
But he also can identify like this is my moment to cut to. He had a great finish. I'm trying to think of who passed it to him.
Might have been Aaron.
Was it Aaron?
He had a couple of them to Josh. Where
Josh finished it like almost like no look over his head. It was just a tough finish in the paint. But I mean that's one of those areas where we're just seeing these guys where that, like you said, that blender gets going where they're cutting off of one another. And a lot of times, and I think you've mentioned this before when we've talked, Paris, that like a cut also is this unselfish play that just drags the defense over for a secondary cut or another pass where you get eyes that shift or, a defender just moves one step over.
It almost has the same gravity as a drive itself.
Yeah, right. It's a great point. Or like it's one of those like underrated moments in offense where you think about a screen or you just think about a pass, but like a well-timed cut can like send off alarm bells to a defense and it opens up something on the weak side, and all of a sudden Isaiah Joe has an open three just because Aaron Wiggins unselfishly cut through the middle of the paint.
Yeah, that vacuum that occurs, just like a big rolling to the rim.
Great word.
The point I wanted to make off of what you were saying, Royce, is just that there's so much rhythm that we're seeing with the cuts, but cutting is a thing that requires a level of discipline that we would often maybe associate more with like patterns. And so the interesting dynamic at play has been the Thunder's not just cutting like willy-nilly. It's clearly that there are some rules about when you cut and from triggers. What direction you cut.
That's a great point.
Based on where the drive is coming from, based on where the ball is on the floor. It's been pretty fascinating to see, as guys drive baseline, that opposite wing guy is typically the one that's coming through the middle of the floor. But it's not so rote that it's predictable, and that's what the Thunder is really trying to achieve is like, can we be disciplined on offense and make sure that we're playing into our identities and into our roles, but not be predictable with it? And so they're starting to achieve this great balance between the patterns and the rhythm, so to speak. And the result is this team now year over year has the 6th highest points per game improvement in the modern era, in the shot
Good
clock
stat,
era.
Nick.
Yeah, so this
High-level
is a
stuff.
team that has really elevated its play holistically. It's not just the guy that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit, Shai, who's had a breakout season, who Royce wrote an amazing article on, but it's a team-wide phenomenon.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it also helps everybody get involved on not just the cutting, but the passing portion of it. Because if you look at Josh's passes, they're not always to the player. They're to a spot, right? So they're in anticipation that Josh is, or that Aaron's going to be open right here in this moment because I know that he's cutting from this corner, from this angle, and I know why he's cutting, and the defender has his back turned. So it just helps everybody kind of be on the same page and anticipate, where the ball needs to go.
Yeah.
The other person I want to talk to who's kind of been a really big beneficiary of this is Isaiah Joe.
Yeah.
And he had 21 points in Sacramento, 7 threes, but I keep looking at Isaiah and the shots that he gets in the game. Every time he makes a shot, I look over at Nick and I'm like, why did they leave him open?
I
I know. Yeah.
Like, how is he open? And it's always on like the first possession that he gets into the game, he gets a 3. And I think to myself, and it's like, not only does that speak to, yes, Isaiah can find these looks, but his teammates trust him wholeheartedly to know that when Isaiah's on the floor, he needs the ball because he's going to knock it down.
Yeah, it's a great point. And look, I think that the book is out on Isaiah Joe. I would think that
I thought
advanced
so.
scouts,
Your top 5 in the NBA in three-point
I would
shooting.
think that they would be like, hey, that guy, see him out here? Like, we don't want to let him shoot. But it goes kind of hand in hand with just kind of the offensive identity stuff, is that you can't guard everybody all the time, especially when the ball moves and you've got players like SGA, like Josh, that are such good drivers of the ball, Lou, that you just break down the defense and they just are forced to help in situations. It was funny on the broadcast against the Nuggets. Chris and Mike were talking about just like teams were coming up to double Shai. They're like, how has nobody, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Because you just got to make one pass
Right.
to Isaiah Joe. But it's like, that's the pressure that these players can put on opposing defenses, that they're almost like making concessions off of like, well, what are
Pick
we
your
supposed to
poison.
do? How are we supposed to? Sometimes it can feel like the Thunder have 7 guys out there offensively
truly.
because of the way the ball moves and because of the way you can get guys open shots. And so for a guy like Isaiah Joe that is such a knockdown shooter, I wonder that myself of like, how is he open again?
Yeah. Well, we talked about this with Kenrich the other day. The Thunder's also getting more clever at how they're manipulating this. And Shai in particular, there was a play in the Indiana game where the Pacers just came and got him. And they were like, we're not going to let Shai make a play here. And Shai actually sort of extended the action further out to the right side of the floor, almost put himself closer to that corner where you don't want to be. But he knows that with his size and his length, once he's drawn those 2 defenders further away from the rest of the action, all he had to do was kick the pass over the top, and it was a swing into the corner for Aaron Wiggins for a wide open catch and shoot 3. So it was almost like Shai baited that double team even further away from the rim in a situation where most guys would be panicked to be double teamed.
Right. Yeah. They would be like, get it out of my hands right here. I don't want to be trapped. But I mean, it is true. It's just the intelligence of the group. And again, they're a super young team, but there is like this IQ element, and also just the experience of seeing it time and time again, I think really, really shows up.
And on top of that, it's so fun to watch this team play this way because you see everybody get involved and they find a lot of joy in finding the guy for a shot. Like like the way the cohesion works together, the rhythm, all of that. We've heard it from the guys. It's really fun for the guys to play this way. And obviously it is putting up some really solid results. So there's a guy we also haven't talked about who's put up some pretty big numbers as well. It's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, back-to-back 30-point performances. We got to talk about him after the break with our very own Royce Young. Don't go anywhere.
COOP Ale Works is the proud sponsor of Thunder Basketball Universe. Brewers of the fan favorites F5 IPA and 99-calorie Ice Chest IPA. You'll find those and many more COOP beers at retailers across Oklahoma. Learn more at CoopAleWorks.com.
All right, we can't talk about this road trip without talking about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Back-to-back 30-point performances, 37 in the loss against Sacramento, and then 34 in the Thunder's game against Denver. Not to mention a game winner where he had an incredible back cut off an inbounds play, shot fake, and then banked it off the glass. Just a high-level shot, high-level performance from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And he's a guy who has been as steady and consistent for the Thunder all season long as anyone, and who has been playing at such a high level on both ends of the floor. 93% of his games, I had this stat on the broadcast the other day. 93% of his games this season, he's had 20 or more points. That's wild.
It's very impressive. And the scoring is just kind of running in the background at this point, and it's something that he's not even super focused on. He talked about really finding ways to lean into what the group is doing offensively is actually his top priority, so that elevates the guys around him. And I think he has an innate understanding of the fact that they need not just all 5 guys on the floor, but they need all 15 guys that, in an actual rhythm in order to be a very good team. And so that's really what he's leaning into. And I think one of the biggest pieces of evidence of like where Shai's mind is at after the game in Denver, the big celebration wasn't crowded around Shai for hitting this great backdoor cut, pump fake leaner over Aaron Gordon. He was mobbing with everybody else, with Lou Dort grabbing him by the collar, saying, "Great job getting the defensive stop." I mean, that is like a true understanding of like what's important to this group and to this team and how to elevate his teammates.
I mean, and one of the things that really stood out, one of the many things about the way that Shai played in Denver is, he had Aaron Gordon on him, a bigger defender, one of the league's best, and you can just see the way that Shai solves defensive adjustments on him. And, different teams are trying different things. They're bringing up a second defender a lot to shadow him and try to kind of trap him to some degree. They're bringing double teams. They're trying all different sorts of things on Shai, and he does such a good job of just solving the problem. And to your point, Nick, a lot of that requires just a pass, and he's totally willing to make that pass. He's unafraid to trust a teammate in a big moment. We've seen him time and time again. To me, that's one of the reasons that I think Shai is so good in clutch scenarios, is because other teams are fully aware that this guy is going to hit an open teammate if I leave my man.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other players in the NBA. It's like, okay, the ball hits his hands and it's not coming out in this situation. And you can leave your defender and you can go trap, you can go double, but Shai keeps that thought in your head where you worry about what he might find. And so you can't just leave him. I was listening to Kurt Goldsberry on the ESPN Daily podcast. He was kind of talking about heliocentric players in the modern NBA. I don't know if you guys listen to this, about why scoring is up for a lot of these players. And they he was tracking it back kind of to the Harden era Rockets, and like you just center an offense around one guy. And that's what a lot of teams kind of tend to do because it's an easy thing to do. You've got this unbelievable ISO player, and you can just basically, I think we've heard Mark Daigneault talk about it, you could just put the coin in the machine over and over again. The Thunder don't do that with Shai.
No.
They really use his skills to enhance the group.
The runway ends at some point with that style.
100%. And that, teams are going to make those adjustments, and then it's going to come down to a big moment in a game where they're double teaming him, and you need somebody to hit a shot in a big moment. And they're not in rhythm. They don't, they haven't had those experiences. Like, in all honesty, Shai could be averaging 36, 37 points a game if he wanted to. I think he's got that kind of offensive talent. But it's almost like he's holding back to average 30 a game in some way to make sure that the group – to me, he's such an efficient, interesting offensive player that there's just so many layers to his game. And really, I think there's a lot of areas that he could still improve in, and he would tell you that.
He even talks about – and he's not focused on the statistics, but I think he is focused on efficiency for the team as a whole. And he said one of the things that he kind of thinks about is whether he's got more made shots than missed shots in a game. And I think for a guard, if you're above 50% shooting from the field, that's extremely impressive. And so I think to your point, Royce, there's something there where, again, the scoring is more of a byproduct of like, are we having efficient offense as opposed to, am I generating production?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and like, I think that, again, like there's areas for him to grow, but and one of them I think is in his 3-point shooting. He could be maybe Mark Daigneault's talked about it a little bit. Like maybe there's a little more willingness, but I also find it really interesting that Shai is so disciplined in not just cranking them all the time. A lot of players in his situation would be averaging 8, 9, 10 threes a game because that Shai can get that shot anytime he wants. He's 6'6". He's got a lethal step back. We've seen it in huge scenarios where he can hit it, but he almost like resists it. It's like he holds it back for like a big moment and a big spot when he really, really needs it because he wants to continue to churn the offense instead.
Well, that was a lesson that he learned last year. Was he took ton of those step back threes and the efficiency went down. Yeah. That was an important part of his growth and development process, is like figuring out which are the ones that are his step back threes and which are the ones that are maybe a little bit more forced. And so, great point there, Royce, and just in terms of like what he's leaving on the table, but he's leaving it there on purpose.
And
Yes.
like one of the things about Shai to me that sticks out is he never wants to feel like the defense got the easy way out. Like,
Yeah.
you know, and sometimes I think taking that shot early in the clock would be giving the defense the easy way out.
For sure.
They didn't have to work that possession. For me, every possession that, you know, that really the Thunder are running, but specifically Shai, it's like you can tell that he just wants to make the defense have to like work.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like you have to guard us, and you're going to have to guard us for an extended period of time. You're going to have to guard multiple actions. We're never going to give you an easy way out.
Well, I think that speaks to kind of the dichotomy and just the trickiness of Shai in general, right? The guy who is the go-to guy, the main guy for this team, but is also just a part of the team. One of 5 guys on the floor, one of 17 guys on the roster. The guy who seems to move it just a million miles a second, but also in half speed at the same time. There's this like push and pull with Shai and just how he plays. And Royce, you wrote an incredible article. It's on OKCThunder.com. It is called Rare and Relentless, and it speaks to this in such a great way. Can you just explain kind of the genesis of this story and how it came about?
So it came about because Shai good. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, really good.
Yes.
Really cool.
Yeah.
He's like,
he is very cool.
He is
Yeah.
cool. I mean, that I couldn't resist. Like that was, you know, you guys are writers, so you understand a lot of times like finding that like lead
Yeah.
is really tough. And I had like 20 different things that I was trying to come up with, and I just kind of settled in on like Shai's just cool, and like that's what I'm going with because
Yeah.
Shai is cool. And but it was really fun to write. First of all, I haven't written a long form feature in a minute now, and it was fun to kind of dip my toe back into that. Shai made it really easy because I sat down and talked with him for like 40 minutes, and he was super. Invested in it. He was had some great thoughts and really some great perspective. But a lot of it just is, to me, like what's so compelling about Shai is he's not your ordinary superstar. Like he's not somebody that came from like the pedigree where it was like he was 100% like, destined to be an all-star in the NBA. And, everybody's probably heard the story at some point that, he didn't make his JV team his first go around. He was only 5'6" as a freshman, 115 pounds is what he told me. And so he had to kind of learn how to play. And, he kind of hit his growth spurt, but even still, he wasn't really highly recruited.
Right. Yeah.
He was the 7th best recruit in Kentucky's, heralded freshman class that they had. Even when he made it to the NBA, he was still a lottery pick, but he was somebody that was kind of seen as like a potential player.
Yeah.
Never seen to be like an all-star. He was going to be a 3-and-D kind of guy.
Yeah. Even Doc Rivers said, I wasn't too sure about this guy when he first came in.
So there's so many things about Shai, and what I think is really compelling about him is just that he is somebody, and it's kind of like what we're talking about, how he solves defensive possession or defensive looks, is he solves everything through work. And he really enjoys like digging into like a process of work. And one of the things he told me is that he loves failing, which is like this weird concept, but he loves the feeling of like, oh, I'm bad at this. Now I got to get good at it.
Yeah.
And so he's taken up things like tennis. He's taken up things like golf. He even kind of referenced it like with his jumper, how he basically tore it down to his studs and like he wanted to like get bad at it to get good. I think like you pointed out, Nick, about the step back, like that was a get bad at it to get good at it type of scenario.
Right.
And so that's just kind of Shai's perspective on how he approaches the game of basketball is like, I want to solve it. I want to master it. That's something he said he wants to do with everything he ever picks up. He wants to master it. And I'm not saying he's mastered basketball, and he certainly wouldn't say that, but he's pretty good at it at this point at 24 years old.
And you have to, like, thinking of it from a big picture, it's why he's such an amazing fit in Oklahoma City, because to accomplish anything great at the NBA level, if all you're doing is picking the like immediate gratification point, if it's putting the coin in the slot, and you think about that from a big picture team building standpoint too, and what the Thunder has been trying to do over the course of the last 2+ years, like they've not been cutting corners to try to get that one extra marginal win in November or in January. And Shai recognizing like I have to fail, and I have to fail pretty like dramatically first to get to where I want to go, instead of putting a hitch in his shot so that he can make one extra three every week. Like it's such great synergy there between star player and organization in terms of an understanding of like what it takes at the NBA level to truly like dig deep and plant something that's going to have deep roots that can truly grow.
Well, and and the influence that has on the rest of the group is pretty obvious. And I talked to Chet Holmgren about it, and just kind of his just observations of Shai that, Chet used the term, which is, a good catchphrase in terms of the Thunder organization, but like process over results, process over outcome. And Shai embodies that, and Chet has recognized that himself. And, one story that Mark Daignault even referenced was the night after Shai hit the game winner against Portland. He walks into the gym. He feels like he's getting there pretty early. It's a little bit before 9 a.m. They're going to have a recovery day. They're not even really having practice. And here's a ball bouncing, and Shai's out on the court all by himself. And that can often feel like kind of these cliche stories that you hear about a lot of guys. But even as Mark told me, it was like, that's money where your mouth is. That's a guy that is like showing up to put the work in the next day. So what that he made the shot the last night? That was the result of the game, but that's not the result of any of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's career. And one of the things about that game that was specifically interesting is Shai did not have a very good game going in a lot of ways. He was missing some chippies around the rim. He missed some jumpers early in it. And to be able to kind of cast that aside, I asked him about that. And he said, and I think he even might have said this on the post game on your walk-off interview, is that those shots are over with. Yeah. And I did my best to make them. I practice those shots all the time. And I'm not going to obsess over the outcome of the shot. Right. I put the shot up. It didn't go in the basket. And he takes that in an inverse way to not over celebrate the fact that it did go in, and he's in the gym the next morning putting in more work, because the outcome is the outcome, and you cast that aside. It's about the process of what's next.
Yeah. It's internal motivation and internal validation, right? The nobody's forcing a 24-year-old Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to be at the gym at 9 a.m. the next morning. But
I'd say sleep in after a good night at the gym.
And it would be very easy for him to be concerned about externally what's validating in terms of whether the shot went in or not, but that's not how he's wired.
Yeah, every person that we talk to about Shai always speaks about his work ethic, just how hard he works and how consistently he works. But Royce, in this article, there was an anecdote that I think speaks to how Shai works, because you could go into the gym, you could just put minutes in the gym, right? Mm-hmm. But Shai is very intentional with his work and kind of every minute he has on the floor. And I want you to talk about this anecdote. And it was the shoot around in Milwaukee that I think kind of speaks to how Shai works.
You guys are on the road with the team all the time, and you probably see this sort of thing a lot. But in my past experiences, I haven't been able to watch shoot around. Yeah. Now that I'm part of the team, I get to watch them a little bit more. And it was so apparent to me of watching a guy like SGA and how invested he is in every moment that he's on the court. And he's got this, vibe about him that it's joyful and lighthearted while also very serious. Yeah. And so on the one hand, he'll go through his drill on the floor, full speed, full intention, and it's setting an example for everybody else. There's no time off to just cruise through it. But then he walks up the court, and then he's kind of his lighthearted self. Yeah. Then it's back into the drill. And to me, that was just so obvious. And not, I don't want to say nobody else on the team is doing that sort of thing, but it's very blatant with Shai that he is intentional about his time on the court, that he wants to maximize it to the most that he can. And again, his young teammates are recognizing this sort of thing. And that's something that Shai even talked about of kind of the passing of the torch from Chris Paul to Shai, and how he kind of had to go through that process of learning that, of what do my teammates need from me? How do I balance what's good for me, what's good for my team? And, Chris Paul obviously is one of the masters of that. And Shai learned a lot from Chris Paul, but you can only learn the most from the experience of actually doing it. And that's, and Shai basically said, I really appreciate the Thunder, giving me that opportunity and trusting me with that. And that's been a 2.5 year process for him to start to kind of figure, and as again, he would say, he doesn't have it figured out now. It's not like he's got it done. He's still working on it. He's still trying to master it, is what he would say.
It's a really good point, because everything up to this point that we've seen from Shai in terms of the numbers and the outcomes, he's earned that, right? He's really, really worked for that. It's the same mentality that he has now. He doesn't feel like he's arrived at any point. He doesn't feel like he's accomplished anything that he's done. He's approaching every day with that exact same work ethic and the same mentality. And the other element to this too is the leadership aspect of this and the effect that it has on his teammates and those around him. And he's still this lighthearted, jovial guy that everyone enjoys to be around. Yeah. But he also is setting a really good example of what it means to and how to approach every single day.
His teammates are they kind of almost feel a part in his success. Yeah. I think obviously a guy like Lou Dort, who grew up with Shai, knows him. They're both Canadians. They're both really, really good friends. But Lou talked to me about that sort of thing of how much pride he feels for Shai. Yeah. And so it's exactly that sort of thing where, you see his teammates around him, you kind of forget the fact that Shai is still extremely young himself. He's 24 years old. And kind of to your point that like Shai would not sit there and say like, I've arrived now. I'm pretty confident he's going to be an all-star. He definitely should be. But like, even I asked him, I was like, do you feel like a superstar at this point? And he was kind of like, I don't know if I would say that, but like, I definitely feel like I'm the best player on the floor every night. And to me, it was like, I think that's a good way to put it.
It's a good sign.
It's that good juxtaposition that Shai manages so well of like a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yes, exactly. Like the confidence that he brings on the floor, but also the humility of being part of a group, and everything that he's gotten up to this point, he's earned. He's still working hard. This entire team is still working hard, and it's super fun to watch. So be sure to go to OKCThunder.com. The article is called "Rare and Relentless." It is a fun read, just as fun as it is to have Royce Young on the podcast. Royce, thanks so much for being here.
You bet.
Thanks,
pleasure.
bud.
So fun. And thank you so much for watching and listening. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.